Morning everyone. So here we are, chapter 6 of Florence Nightingale's The Angel of the Crimea. It's called The Trumpet Call. It starts with a poem. Willie, fold your little hands, let it drop, that soldier toy. Look where father's picture stands, father that here kissed his boy. Not a month since, father kind, who this night may, never mind. Mother's sob, my Willie dear, cry out loud that he may hear. Who is God of battles? Cry, God keep father safe this day by the Alma River. Ask no more, child, never heed either Russ or Frank or Turk. Right of nations, trampled creed, chance poised victory's bloody work. Any flag in the wind may roll on thy heights, Sevastopol. Willie, all to you and me, is that the spot, whate'er it be, where he stands, no other word, stands, God sure, the child's prayers heard, near the Alma River. Willie listened to the bells ringing in the town today. That's for victory, no knell swells, for the many swept away. Hundreds, thousands, let us weep. We who need not, just to keep reason clear in thought and brain, till the morning comes again, till the third dread morning tell who they were that fought and fell by the Alma River. Come, we'll lay us down, my child, poor the bed is, poor and hard, but thy father, far exiled, sleeps upon the open sward, dreaming of us two at home, or beneath the starry dome, digs out trenches in the dark, where he buries Willie, mark, where he buries those who died, fighting, fighting at his side, by the Alma River. Willie, Willie, go to sleep, God will help us, O my boy. He will make the dull hours creep faster and send news of joy. When I need not shrink to meet those great placards in the street, that for weeks will ghastly stare in some eyes, child, say that prayer. Once again, a different one. Say, O God, thy will be done, by the Alma River. Open your atlas at the map of Russia. Look down towards the bottom, at the part of the great empire which borders on the Euxine or Black Sea. There you will find a small peninsula. It really is almost an island, being surrounded on three sides by water, labelled the Crimea. It's not called that anymore. It is only a part of one of the smallest of Russia's 40-odd provinces, the Prince of Taurida, yet it is one of the most famous places of history. For years, in the years 1854 and 1855, was fought the Crimean War, one of the greatest wars of modern times. Russia and Turkey have never been good neighbours. They have always been jealous of each other, always quarrelling about this or that, the fact being that each is afraid of the others getting too much land and too much power. In these disputes, the other countries of Europe have generally sympathised with Turkey, feeling that Russia had quite got enough power, and that if she had more it might be dangerous for all of them. Some days you will read in history about the Eastern question and the balance of power, and you will find out just what this meant in the 50s. This is 1750s, or the 1850s, but this is all you need know now in order to understand what I'm going to tell you. So the author is now going to refer to 1854, not our time. This is obviously 100 years ago, 150 years ago. In 1854, Turkey, feeling that Russia was pressing too hard upon her, called upon the other European powers to help her. The result was that England, France, Sardinia, which is now part of Italy, were separate kingdoms. And Turkey made an agreement with one another, and they all declared war on Russia. England had been at peace with the world for about 40 years, ever since the Wars of Napoleon, which had closed by the great victory of Waterloo. The English are a brave race. They had forgotten the horrors of war and remembered only its glories and its victories, and they sprang to armies as joyously as boys run to a football game. "Sharpen your cutlasses, and the day is ours," said Charles Napier to his men just before the British fleet set sail, and this was the feeling all through the country. The fleets of the Allied powers gathered in the Black Sea, forming one great armada surrounding the peninsula of the Crimea, and landed their armies. In September of 1854, there was the first great battle fought by the Alma River. The Allies were victorious, and a great shout of joy went up all over England. "Victory! Victory!" cried the old and young. There were bells and bonfires and illuminations. The whole country went mad with joy, and for a short time no one thought anything except glory, waving banners and sounding trumpets. But banners and trumpets, though a real part of war, are only a very small part of it, and after a little time, through the shouting and rejoicing, a different sound was heard, the sounding of weeping, not only for hundreds of brave men who were lying dead beside the fatal river, but also for the hundreds of sick and wounded soldiers dying for the want of care. There had been a gross neglect and terrible mismanagement of the carrying on of the war. Nobody knew just whose fault it was, but everything seemed to be lacking that was the most needed on the desolate shore of the Crimea. English troops were in an enemy's country, and a poor country at that. Whatever supplies they had were being taken by the Russian armies for their own needs. Food and clothing had been sent out from England in great quantities, but somehow nobody could find where they were. Some supplies had been stowed in the hold of the ships, and other things piled on top so that they could not get at them. Some were stored in warehouses which no one had authority to open. Some were actually rotting at the ship's wharves for want of precise orders as to how to get to them. Surgeons had no bandages, doctors saw no medicines. It was a state of things that today we can hardly imagine. Indeed, it seemed as if the need were so great and terrible that it paralyzed those who saw it. "It is now pouring rain," wrote one William Howard Russell to the London Times. "The skies are as black as ink, the wind is howling over the staggering tents, the trenches are turned into dikes. In the tents the water is sometimes a foot deep. Our men have not either warm or waterproof clothing. They are out for 12 hours at a time in the trenches. They are plunged into the inevitable miseries of a winter campaign. Winter campaign is a form of war taking part in winter. And not a soul seems to care for their comfort or even for their lives. These are the hard truths, but for the people of England must hear them. They must know that the wretched beggar who wanders about the streets of London in the rain leads the life of a prince compared with the British soldiers who are fighting out here for their country. The commonest accessories of a hospital are wanting. There is not the least attention paid to decency or clean linen. The stench is appalling. The fetid air can hardly struggle out to taint the atmosphere. Fetid means smelly, rotten, just horrible. Imagine the worst smell you can imagine. That doesn't even describe fetid. Save through the chinks in the walls and roofs, and for all who I can observe, these men die without the least effort being made to save them. There they lie, just as they were let gently down on the ground by the poor fellows, their comrades who brought them on their backs from the camp with the greatest tenderness, but who are not allowed to remain with them. The sick appear to be tended by the sick, and the dying by the dying. He added that the snow was 3 feet deep on a level, and the cold so intense that many soldiers were frozen in their tents. No one meant to be cruel or neglectful, but there were not half enough doctors, and, think of it, children. There were no nurses. But how did this happen? Well, when the war broke out, military authorities didn't want female nurses. The matter was talked over, and it was decided that things would go better without them. This was put on the ground that the class of nurses, as I've told you, was at the time in England a very poor one. They were often drunk, generally unfeeling, and always ignorant. The War Department decided that this kind of nurse would do more harm than good. They did not realise that the order could change and that they could replace them with new, and that the time was come when the new nurse might replace the old. But now the need had come, and it was immediate and terrible, and there was no one there to meet that need. When the people of England realised this, when they learned that the hospital at Scutari was filled with sick and wounded and dying men and no one to care them, save for a few male orderlies or porters who were untrained for the task, when they heard that in the hospitals of the French army the Sisters of Mercy were doing their blessed work, tending the wounded, healing the sick, and comforting the dying, and realised that the English soldiers, their own sons, brothers, and husbands, had no such help and no comfort, the sound of the bell and trumpet was lost in a great cry of anger and sorrow that went up from the whole country. Matters grew worse and worse, as another great battle after another sent its dreadful fruits to the already overflowing hospital at Scutari. On October 25th came Balaclava, on November the 5th, and Inkerman. You've all read The Charge of the Light Brigade. Well, we haven't. Well, I have, but you guys won't have done. And the author said she asks you to read it again here so that it may fit into its place in the story of this terrible war. Remember, it is only one incident of that great battle at the Balaclava in which both sides claimed the victory, while neither gained any signal of advantage. So here you go. So The Charge of a Light Brigade is a poem. So here we go. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew. Someone had blundered, that means made a mistake. Theirs not to make a reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. So they're being shot at from left and right and in the front, but still they charged onwards. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring their gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke. Shattered and sundered, then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honour the charge they made, honour the Light Brigade, noble 600. I have already spoke of William Howard Russell. He was the war correspondent of the Times, the great English newspaper, and a man of intelligence, heart and feeling. He was on the spot and saw the horrors of the war at first hand. His heart was filled with sorrow and pity for the suffering around him, and with indignation that so little was done to relieve it, and he wrote day after day home to England, telling what he saw and what was needed. Soon after Balaclava he wrote, "Are there no devoted women among us able and willing to go forth to minister to the sick and suffering soldiers of the East in the hospitals at Scutari? Are there none of the daughters of England at this extreme hour of need ready for such a work of mercy? France has sent forth her Sisters of Mercy unsparingly, and they are even now by their bedsides of the wounded and the dying, giving what women's hands alone can give of comfort and relief. Must we fall so far below the French in self-sacrifice and devotedness in a work which Christ so signally blesses as done unto himself? I was sick, and ye visited me." This was the trumpet call that rang in the ears of the women of England, sounding a clearer note than all the clarions of victory. We shall see how it was answered. Chapter 7. The Response. Mr. Sidney Herbert, afterwards he became known as Lord Herbert, was at this time the head of the War Department in England. He was a man of noble nature and tender heart, whose whole life was spent in doing good and in helping those who needed help. He heard with deep distress the dreadful tidings of suffering that came from the Crimea, and his heart responded instantly to the call for help. Yes, the women of England must rise up and go to that far, desolate land to tend and nurse the sick and wounded and dying. But who should lead them? What one woman had the strength, the power, wisdom, and tenderness to meet and overcome the terrible conditions? Asking himself this question, Mr. Herbert answered without a moment's hesitation, Florence Nightingale. He knew Miss Nightingale well. She was a dear friend of himself and his beautiful wife, and again had given them help, counsel in planning and managing their many charities, hospitals, homes for the sick, and so forth. He knew that she possessed all the qualities needed for this work, and he wrote to her, asking if she would undertake it. Would she, he asked, go out to Scutari with her band of nurses, who would be under her orders and take charge of the hospital nursing? He did not make light of the task. He wrote to her, The selection of the rank and file of nurses would be difficult. No one knows them better than yourself. The difficulty of finding women equal to the task after the full of horror and requiring, besides intelligence and goodwill, knowledge and great courage will be hard. The task of ruling them and introducing system among them great, and not the least will be the difficulty of making the whole work smoothly with the medical and military authorities out there. This it is which makes it so important that the experiment should be carried out by one with administrative capacity and experience. He went on to assure Miss Nightingale that she should have full power and authority, and told her quite frankly that in his opinion she was the one and only woman in the whole of England who was capable of performing this task. I must not conceal from you that upon your decision will depend the ultimate success or failure of this plan. If this succeeds, an enormous amount of good will be done, and to persons deserving everything at our hands, and which will multiply the good to all time. It was a noble letter. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a pooch. It was a noble letter, this of Mr. Herbert's, but he might have spared himself the trouble of writing it. Florence Nightingale, in her quiet country home, had heard the call to the women of England, and even while Mr. Herbert was composing his letter, she was writing to him a brief note, simply offering her services in the hospitals at Scutari. Her letter crossed his on the way, and the next day it was proclaimed from the War Office that Miss Nightingale, a lady with greater practical experience of hospital administration and treatment than any other lady in the country, had been appointed by the government to the office of superintendent of all nurses at Scutari, and had undertaken the work of organising and taking out nurses. Great amazement was in England. Nothing of this kind had ever been heard of before. Who was Miss Nightingale? People cried all over the country. They were answered by the newspapers, first by the Examiner and then by the Times, who told them that Miss Nightingale was a young lady of singular endowments, both natural and acquired, in a knowledge of the ancient languages and of the higher branches of maths, arts, science, and literature. Her attainments are extraordinary. There is scarcely a modern language which she does not understand. She can speak French, German, and Italian as fluently as her native English. She has visited and studied all the various nations of Europe and has ascended to the Nile to its remotest cataract. That means that the furthest point of the Nile. Young, who was about the age of our Queen, graceful, feminine, rich, popular, she holds a singularly gentle and persuasive influence over all whom she comes into contact. Her friends and acquaintances are all of classes and persuasions, but her happiest place is at home, in the centre of a very large band of accomplished relatives and in simplest obedience to her admiring parents. One who knew our heroine well wrote in a more personal vein, Miss Nightingale is one of those whom God forms for great ends. You cannot hear her say a few sentences, no, not even look at her, without feeling that she is an extraordinary being. Simple, intelligent, sweet, full of love and benevolence. She is a fascinating and perfect woman. She is tall and pale. Her face is exceedingly lovely, but better than all is the soul's glory that shines through every feature so exultingly. Nothing can be sweeter than her smile. It is like a sunny day in summer. Although well known among a large circle of earnest and high-minded persons, Miss Nightingale's name was entirely new to the English people as a whole, and everything else apart, they were delighted with its beauty. Had she been plain Mary Smith, she would have done just as good work, but it would have been far harder for her to start it. Florence Nightingale was a name to conjure with, as she is saying, and it echoed far and wide. Everybody who could write verses, and many who could not, began instantly to write about nightingales. Punch printed a cartoon showing a hospital ward with the ladybirds hovering over the cots of sick men, each bird having a nurse's head. Another picture represented one of the bird nurses flying through the air carrying in her claws a jug labelled fomentation, embrocation, gruel. This was called the jug of the nightingale, for many people think that some of the bird's beautiful liquid notes sounded like jug, jug, jug. Not content with pictures, Punch printed the Nightingale song to the sick soldier, which became very popular and was constantly quoted in those days. Of course, there were some people who shook their heads. There always are when any new work is undertaken. Some thought it was improper for women to nurse in a military hospital. Others thought they would be useless or worse. Others again thought that the nurses would ruin their own health and would be sent home in a month to the hospitals of England. There were still other objections which were strongly felt in those days, however strange they may sound in our ears today. "Oh, dreadful," said some people. "Miss Nightingale is a Unitarian." "Oh, shocking," said others. "Miss Nightingale is a Roman Catholic." And so it went on. But while they were talking and exclaiming, drawing pictures and singing songs, Miss Nightingale was getting ready. In 6 days from the time she undertook the work, she was ready to start, with 30 nurses chosen with infinite care and pains from the hundreds who had volunteered to go. There were no trumpets. While England was still wondering how they could go and whether they ought to be allowed to go, behold, they had gone, slipping away by night as if they were bound on some secret errand. Miss Nightingale had never been one to endure fuss and feathers, and all her life she had looked like for a bushel large enough to hide her light under, though happily she had never succeeded. Only a few relatives and near friends stood on the railway platform on the evening of October the 21st, 1854, as Miss Nightingale, simply dressed in black, was very quiet, serene, with a cheerful few words for everyone. No one who saw her parting look and smile ever forgot them. So in night and silence, the angel band, whose glory was soon to shine over all the world, left the shores of England. But though England slept that night, France was very wide awake the next morning. The fishwives of Boulogne had heard what was doing across the channel and were on the lookout when Miss Nightingale and the nurses stepped ashore, and they were met by a band of women in snowy caps and rainbow-striped petticoats, all with outstretched hands, all crying, "Welcome, welcome, our English sisters." They were Marie and Jean and Suzette, their own husbands, sons, brothers, fighting and dying in the Crimea. Their own nurses, the Blessed Sisters of Mercy, had from the first been toiling in hospitals and trench in that dreadful land. How should they not welcome their English sisters who were going to join the holy work? Loudly they proclaimed, but none but themselves, the fishwives of Boulogne, should help the Sœurs Anglaises, which means English sisters in French. They shouldered bag and baggage, they swung their heavy trunks upon their broad backs, and with laughter and tears mingled in true French fashion, trudged away to this railway station. Pay? Not a sou, not a centime. The blessing of our English sisters is all we desire, and if they should chance to see Pierre or Jacques là-bas, which means over there, the heavens are all over. A handshake then, and adieu, adieu. The good God go with you. And that prayer was surely answered. And that's where we're going to leave it there because my doggy wants to go somewhere. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.